Hey everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Disciples Download. And this week we're going to focus on verses 12 to 18 in our passage from Sunday. I'm outside today because it's an absolutely gorgeous day. I'm sitting on the back porch and just enjoying what God has put before us weather-wise this week. It may contrast sharply with the world and all that's going on in it, but I encourage you, if you have the chance this week, please get outside and enjoy some time outdoors, because it's really good for you, it's good for us. But I want to drill down a little bit and go further into our passage from Sunday, and I want to do that because there's a lot of really good stuff here. And with any sermon, a pastor can't really get to everything he wants to say. And so I want to drill down on verses 12 through 18 this morning and really talk a little bit about those particular verses. So open your Bibles with me to Philippians 2, verses 12 through 18. And we're going to cover some ground we've already covered, but we're also going to talk some practical wisdom in all of this. So read with me the Word of God. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out, poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. May God bless to our hearts this reading of his holy word. I love the book of Philippians for a number of reasons, and I've always wanted to study it a lot closer than I've had the opportunity to study it. And so this sermon series has given me that opportunity, but it's also given me a chance to just fall deeper in love with this biblical book, biblical letter to the Philippians. And I hope that the series is having the same effect on you. For one thing, I'm learning a lot, especially in relation to our present situation. I had a professor in graduate school who used to say, "We've never lived in a time closer to the time the early church lived in than we do today." And I believe this is true even here in Buffalo Center, because even here in Buffalo Center, secularism is the norm and not the exception. I think there was a statistic I gave to the board when we first got here that less than 30% of the town is in church on Sunday, and so and that includes families that go outside of town. And so while we may think we still live in a relatively Christian part of the country, we actually are starting to see the same rise of secularism and rise of the nuns and rise of the duns that have been happening on the coast for more than a decade. And so we're starting to see those trends come true here in the heartland and in the South, places that have traditionally been Christian strongholds. And actually in the South, you should know that more and more people are identifying as done or none, as in no religious affiliation, or they're done with the church in general, at a faster rate than they did on the coast at any time in the history. So, while secularism is on the rise in our area, it's rising a lot quicker than it did on the coast. So instead of a gradual change, we're seeing a more rapid change. And so that's why I said on Sunday, my daughter's generation is looking at being less than 20%, at having a salvation rate of less than 20%. And so I tell you that not to give you doom and gloom statistics. Actually, there's a lot of positive things happening too. Tim Keller notes that, or when asked the question, is secularism or is Christianity growing faster? Timothy Keller said, neither and both. They're both growing at about the same pace worldwide. But in this case, in the West, in Western Christendom, in America, the church is on the decline while it's exploding in other parts of the world. And there's a number of reasons for that. For one, public opinion is turning against us. It's no longer popular to be a Christian, and cultural Christianity itself is dying out, and a new kind of Christianity is forming that's very, very biblically informed and wants to be focused on the Word. And that's a good thing, especially as public opinion turns against us as Christians, and we start to see ourselves less and less invited to the table and the seat of power. And as I said on Sunday, in some ways we've accelerated these trends, which is unfortunate in the way that we've acted and reacted to some of these things. But I love the book of Philippians because in the midst of all that, we have a guide for how to live. You know, Paul is addressing the Philippians from prison. He's suffering. He is in chains, and he's in chains for the gospel, and he makes sure this is known to the Philippians. And so, while he's in chains for the gospel, he's also spreading the gospel. The gospel is spreading because of what's happened to him. And it's not because he's angrily yelling at the media pundits or at the politicians, or because he's demanding that certain things go his way, but because he's exemplifying Christ. Paul's not one to give an example and then not do it himself. Paul's not one to say you should do this and do the opposite. Actually, in Corinthians, he says, I've lived this way before you, so that we weren't a burden to you. So he understands this path of radical downward mobility. He has practiced it before the Romans, and because of that, the gospel has spread. And so he gives this knowledge, this example, to the Philippians and says, obey it. Follow it. You are Christians, and you should obey Christ because he has done these things for you. And because he is Christ, because he's Lord, because he's the name above all names, and the name before which every single human being that ever lived is going to bow before and confess that he is Lord, you should live in such a way that you are emulating Christ in everything that you do. Now that's an unpopular viewpoint in our society. It really is. It's unfortunate because we act as though, and it's an unpopular view in the church. We have a lot of things that we want to hold on to. We talk about how we want things to be the way they were, which is a perfectly legitimate conservative mindset. We miss the days when institutions were strong. We miss the days when people kept their word and were people of their word. We miss the days. Now, there were a lot of things wrong with those days, but there were some good things about those days as well. Instead of everybody doing their own thing, we now, cared for one another and cared for our neighbor. And a sense of community was important, and we fear that we've lost that. But the way to get that back is not to yell at people for taking it away. It's not to be nasty to people, to politicians. It's not even to grumble and complain about the fact that it is going away. The way to create community and restore institutions is by being a part of them and by engaging in them and not downplaying trust in them, especially the church. The church currently has a trust issue. If you ask people if they trust clergy or the church in general, they say no on an increasingly wider scale. And that is true here as much as it's true in every other place. And so this is the world we live in. But Christ's example is radically different. I've used the phrase before, other people have used the phrase before me, the radical third way of Christianity. The way of Christ, the Jesus life in the Jesus way, as Eugene Peterson puts it. That is this radical humility that Jesus demonstrates. Because as I said in the sermon Sunday, we are on the same level with God because of Christ's work. We're heirs and co-heirs with Christ. But now we face the same decision. Do we lay that down, those rights and privileges down for the sake of our neighbor? Or do we hold them up and act as though we are superior because we have them? Well, actually the choice is taken out of our hands. Paul says obey. Obey the example of Christ. Obey Christ himself. And don't act as though you are better than or superior to anyone around you. In fact, do the opposite. Take up the towel and serve them as though they are better than you. And that is taking on the same mind of Christ. And that includes politicians. Now, I know there are politicians that we all disagree with. I have a radical disagreement with politicians on both sides of the aisle. But I'm trying to be better about, because when you're young and idealistic, it's easy to slide into these habits. I'm trying to be better about tearing them down and demolishing them, because all that says is, one, that I disagree, and two, that I'm willing to be nasty about my disagreement. And that's not the way of Christ. Even for all the things Christ said to the Pharisees, he never, ever denies the image of God in them. In fact, he's always challenging them to be better. He's always challenging them to live the life that the Torah puts before them to live. Matthew 15, multiple passages where he just wants the Pharisees to do what God has put before them to do. That's not nasty. That's not even an unreasonable request given the position the Pharisees were in. But here's the other thing. Jesus also required those things of the regular people, to do what God had put before them to do. And so that standard is not just for the clergy, but also for the people. When I was at Sterling College, Sterling teaches a lot about the practice of servant leadership. When I worked behind the scenes, when I worked for maintenance in particular, one of the things we would always get thrown at us when something needed to be done that could have easily been done by an administrator, something like getting the car keys for their 15-minute drive up to Lyons. Small requests, not big things, or moving a box 2 feet, an empty box 2 feet. We would always get thrown at us, well, you have to be servant leaders. But that standard didn't apply to the people who we were supposed to be serving. And so there was this vicious double standard. And Jesus says it's not supposed to be that way. The way of Jesus doesn't employ a double standard. It employs one standard, and that is Jesus Christ himself. And all people, big or small, rich or poor, pastors, laity, whatever, are supposed to live in that way. Now, there might be some things you need to consider giving up. Some ways you might need to change your lifestyle so that you are exemplifying Christ. There might be some people you need to reach out to. But there also may be some idols you need to confront. Some idols that have snuck in and make you believe that because you've achieved X, Y, and Z, you're so much greater. And those idols can be really hard to let go. I know. And a way to tell if something is an idol is how you respond, is the reaction that you have when that comes to mind. Or the idea of giving that up comes to mind. If someone suggests, hey, maybe you should lay this down, maybe that's an idol. These things are hard to consider. But Paul has shown us what Jesus has laid before us. This is the way of Jesus, that we live in this way. That he humbled himself to death, even death on a cross, even though he had the equality with God. He didn't consider it something to be grasped. That's the Jesus life and the Jesus way. Taking up the towel and serving one another. And no matter what happens in this world, no matter who's elected president, no matter what kind of government we have or are under or whatever, the church will survive. God will always keep for himself a remnant of servant leaders. Those who have followed Jesus to the core and in every situation. So that's my challenge. Alright, it doesn't matter what happens tomorrow. Our future is secure. All that matters is for today that we put on Christ and do the things that he's asked and live in the way that he has given for us to live. Because he's not going to let us down or abandon us. I love you. I miss you. I hope you're all doing well. We will definitely see you.